Hi, you guys. Day two of this thing. I'm indoors today. My daughter is upstairs. Hopefully she'll stay up there. My wife's with her, and my trusty beagle's over here. Let's see if you can find her. Bailey, Bailey, hi. You say hi to the kids. You say hi. There's my daughter's homeschooling stuff too right now. Pretty wild stuff. All right. So with that, let's get to the Holocaust. Just gotta click this. While I'm doing this, I'll also post the notes, the hard copy version, so you can follow along if you want. And we'll go from there. All right, so the topic today is the Holocaust. Depending on the time we have left in the school year, we'll hopefully try to watch Schindler's List, but this is a lecture setting you up for that movie. This is the one time of the year I really, in the classroom, I want you to be glued into this lecture. It's an incredibly important topic to talk about. I myself am not Jewish by any means, but I was lucky enough to be part of a class at Grand Valley State where I got to be with a preeminent Holocaust professor who would once in a while be at Grand Valley, and special students would have to submit the request to be in the course. And I was lucky enough to join Robert Francois, my teacher, who taught this lecture. And he said he was going to emotionally break us. There were certain things that would cause certain kids to leave the classroom because it was rather intense. We were shown stuff that wasn't released to the public yet. And my breaking point was it was probably 11 to 12 weeks into the course, and we were looking at the cleanup of the bodies, and I saw a bulldozer just pushing a pile of corpses, and I saw an arm flail and flop, and that was my breaking point. I'd leave class. You send an email back. You tell them what was the moment that really kind of broke you. So I emailed him. They did a test, and then once you're allowed to come back to the course, you come back to the course. So I'll try to take my knowledge of the subject and then make it simple and organic as possible to understand so you guys can understand it. So a lot of you are familiar with the story of Anne Frank. This was your 8th grade ELA course, so that's a great introduction to some of the ideas the Jewish people are facing in terms of sheltering in place and trying to avoid being captured. Boy in the Striped Pajamas is another great movie, does a good job with this. You will watch Schindler's List. It is up for one of the top movies, the top 10 all time voted by Hollywood, so it's incredibly powerful. So the Holocaust, the definition for itself is unique to World War II. It's what happens with World War II, and it's only in that scenario. So the Holocaust was the killing of 6 million Jews by order of Adolf Hitler. And when we say 6 million Jews, there's other people as well. You have gypsies. Those are people from a certain portion of Romania who kind of traveled, almost like nomads. They were swept up in this. Political radicals, anyone who opposed Adolf Hitler, anyone who is homosexual by any means. And of course, one thing I didn't add on there was any kind of person with a cognitive person with Down syndrome would be eradicated as well. So the Holocaust is unique to World War II. You cannot say Holocaust or any kind of recent genocide. It's only during World War II, specifically what happened in Nazi Germany. So what you need to understand is there's a difference between the Holocaust and a genocide. A genocide is any event before or after the Holocaust, and genocide, just like the Holocaust, is an intentional eradication of an entire race, people, or religion. And we think that we learn from the events of history, but there's other events. Rwanda, 1994, in Africa, there was a purge. We'll cover that in this course. Sierra Leone, there was also an ethnic purge in 1995 in Africa. My students at Kentwood were subject to this, the Bosnian genocide, and then we'll cover this course to Sudan later on as well. So the term Holocaust is also linked up with this idea called the final solution, and that's Adolf Hitler's plan to eventually remove all the Jews from Europe via extermination. And that was his solution to the problem. The Jews were the problem, and his final solution was to murder an entire continent worth of Jews. So let's rewind history here. Let's get to understand how it came from traditional Germany to the Holocaust. Well, you're familiar with Mein Kampf. Mr. G covered that. Mein Kampf, that's first suggested in Hitler's book that Jews be eliminated. Now, it's not saying exactly why in terms of physical violence against them, but it suggests that they first be eliminated in Mein Kampf, written in the 30s. And when Hitler rises to power eventually, he's Chancellor of Germany. He informs all Jews living in the country they have to pay a heavy tax to stay, or they may leave. Now, a lot of times people didn't leave because that is where their businesses, their family, their roots were kept for generations. Jews have been living in Germany. We go all the way back to the second and first century. So a lot of them weren't going to move out. They never thought. It's one thing to say that they knew it was going to happen, but they just didn't know. So a lot of the German Jews who had the money tended to stay in Germany, and those who felt it was too ominous under Hitler moved to a different location. So at that point, you had the laws. If you chose to stay, Jews were then forced to wear identification badges that went on your arm. If you owned a business, you also had to put this Star of David, a symbol that goes back to the Old Testament, according to Judaism, and it's a covenant between the Hebrews and their God. But this is also a marker. Oftentimes, the marker was placed up to stop anti-Jews Germans from buying goods from Jewish shops. It was a way to identify them so Germans wouldn't spend their money in those shops. Now, a lot of people have asked me, like, couldn't you just simply not wear your your armband? You were forced to have papers on you at all times. And the Germans went to great lengths to go through your genealogy to understand if you were Jewish or not. So that's how they were identified, and that's how they were singled out of the German population. Although they were Germans themselves in terms of living under Germany, they were ethnically, they were Jewish. And because they were ethnically Jewish, they were really singled out in German society. Once they're captured, they're also tattooed as well. You see the bottom picture down here. It's pretty similar for all prisoners to have this, but this is specific to the Jews of the Holocaust. So what really starts to get the ball moving is this tragic moment in history known as Kristallnacht or Kristallnacht. It's a night of broken glass in the translation from German. So Hitler ordered his own soldiers, his own henchmen, to dress up as Jews and to destroy Jewish businesses and Jewish synagogues. And a synagogue, if you're not familiar, is a Jewish place of worship, or a church if you're a Judeo-Christian. So, and he does this. He sets up this false narrative as a way to justification to start taking some legal actions to actually start locking Jews down. Up to this point, they're free to move. They simply have to be identified by the armband. But this is a new phase. Kristallnacht is the idea they started to be locked down into different areas. So they've been identified, and now they're being quarantined. So Hitler blamed all the Jews for public property, and this is his justification for arresting and also locking down thousands of Jews living throughout Germany. And if you had a history teacher last semester, you might be familiar with the story of Nero in Rome. Nero in Rome blamed the Christians who were living in Rome, so they burned Rome down and used as justification to take them and slaughter them as well. So some pictures here of Kristallnacht, shopkeepers cleaning up after the mess, Jewish synagogues destroyed. So the next phase, we've gone from identification to locking them down in different areas, is now start to take them out of the areas that they were living in and then to put them in the concentration camps. And I should be clear, the areas they were forced to live in, the best houses that they were living in oftentimes were taken by the Nazis and the SS and given to loyal party members or people who were part of the military industrial complex in Germany. Big manufacturers were given the homes of Jews, and the Jews are then put into less than stellar areas, cramped housing, and they're locked down under guard. You'll see a scene in the movie where a person is complaining who's Jewish and says, "How can this get any worse?" And about 5 more families are moving into this one-room apartment where the Jews are being kept. So moving away from the lockdown area, we're going to the concentration camps. They're moved out of those areas, and now they are now put into these quickly, hastily built concentration camps of the Germans. And the big picture, some Jews who left Germany and went to Poland or went to other countries like France, as you know, as Germany expands early in World War II, that is when that population that got out of Germany is captured and then shipped off to these concentration camps as well. So even if you had the wherewithal to get out of Germany in the 1930s and go to a different country, as Germany expanded, you were caught. If you look here in the lecture, there's this tragic lie put over the entrance into Auschwitz, one of the most famous German Holocaust camps. Arbeit macht frei, the translation to English, work will make you free. So the lie was told that if you worked very hard for the Germans, it was a way to potentially save yourself. And the truth be told, there was never, ever that plan. So the German Jews are working, and there's going to be no saving grace. It's an incredible lie told to them. If you get a chance to see it someday, you'll still see this entrance into Auschwitz, Arbeit macht frei. And these concentration camps quickly built low insulation. And if you've ever bunked with your brother or sister before, bunk beds, you had usually 2 bunk beds. Imagine 4 to 6 bunk beds, and there's not much space. I mean, you were talking maybe enough room that you could slide your bodies in, and they're deep too. So as you're sleeping, you might have 4 or 5 people next to you on your own level and layer, and they stack them up. So that's going to cause a real issue in terms of the hygiene and spreading of diseases. As you know, right now we're in this social distancing because the coronavirus. When you put people in bad health right next to each other, it only amplifies the spread of different diseases. So that is the conditions in these hastily built uh, concentration camps. Now, some of the people did not go. Some they couldn't get everyone into the concentration camp. That's for the most part they did, but some were simply locked in this thing called the ghetto. And the ghetto is where people were kept under lock and key. They couldn't get out. They were isolated. You could see the Nazi guards wouldn't allow the Jews out of different areas. The best example where they actually fought back against the Nazis happened in Warsaw, Poland. There was resistance, there was an uprising against some of the Nazis, but for the most part, they were confined to these different areas. You were basically locked in via barbed wire. You were under constant surveillance, and that is where you stayed. Sometimes they pulled them out of these areas and dropped them into concentration camps, and sometimes, if you got lucky, you'd be under lock in this thing called the ghetto. Here's the Warsaw ghetto, different neighborhoods where they easily locked down Jewish neighborhoods. They moved you from the good part of the city to the different part of the city where they could have larger groups. So back to the idea of life in the camp. When you were working inside a concentration camp, you were working for 16 plus hours and just doing simple tasks. A nutritionist came in and lectured us about how much your body's burning. You're burning about 3,500 calories on light physical labor based on the German regiment. So you're burning about 3,500 calories and you're only taking in about 500, 600 calories per day. If you want to visually understand what 500, 600 calories a day is, imagine about 3 Pop-Tarts. That's how much you're getting, and you're expending a good amount of calories, if not more, based on what you're assigned to do in the concentration camp. So as the body starts to break down, there's a few phases to human starvation. And one thing what we tend to see first is the body tends to eat muscle first. And that's why when you look at the people from those concentration camps in the Holocaust, they're rather ghostly. The muscle has been eaten off by their bodies as a survival mechanism. So that's why they look the way they do. Oftentimes the Germans would have inspections where they would take the women and they'd force them, or the men, force them to run around as a sign of their physical fitness level. If you were strong, you lived. If you didn't, you were killed. So you'll see in the movie Schindler's List, there's a scene where the inspection is coming, and the women would take their fingers and they'd intentionally cut their fingers slightly, and they'd pool the blood up, and they'd pool the blood at the top of their fingertip, and they take the blood and dab it on their face as a way to look healthy, to put some color into them. Because if you've ever been sick before, you know when you're sick, you're very white, almost ghostly. And this is a way the Jewish Germans learned to adapt so they wouldn't be killed in these inspections. Psychologically, the Germans they intentionally divided camp by gender and age. So there was a men's camp, there was a women's camp, and there was also a children's camp. And that was intentional to break down the important glue that really holds people together in times of crisis. Families are what get people through, and the Nazis intentionally destroyed that coping mechanism. It broke down the sense of family. It's also in these same camps where the Nazis would study children. They were obsessed with twins, and they do some very unethical tests on oftentimes young children and twins to see if they could produce a different outcome with similar individuals. Oftentimes little kids, they would test for eye color to try to get a blue eyes. There's even stories that Germans would test children. They would put one into an area where it would be its diaper would change, it would be held, and it would be fed, and another test group would be taken away from any kind of human contact. They'd just change the diaper, They would just give it food, and they found that there's a connection between human touch and non-human touch. The babies that were touched by the Germans and held lived, and the babies that didn't have human affection died at a much faster rate. One of the things I was introduced to from my college professor is this graphic artist novel called by Art Spiegelman. Spiegelman, if you see it here, Spiegelman is the son, and his father survived the Holocaust, and the son interviewed his father about the events from the Holocaust. So this next part are taken from these recordings the son would do for his father, and then the son then turned them into a graphic novel telling the story of what happened inside the extermination camps. One thing you find, obviously, is the tight living quarters. That's a theme all throughout the several books that Art Spiegelman wrote. Tight quarters because they had to get so many people like just crammed in there. There's stories that people would take, this father would tell that they would take the wood from the bunk beds and they'd break the wood out. And once they broke the wood out that was holding the beds above them, they would then take the ends of it and grind it on the floor and try to produce almost like a sawdust. And they take the sawdust, they throw it into their water, and there's a way to get some type of calories into their system. So as this goes on, as you're living in these nasty conditions for longer periods of time, one of the big issues really is the flea population that starts moving to concentration camps. So this is when the Germans start to shave the heads of the people inside the camps as a way to stop the spread of the rampant flea population inside the camps. And in terms of the general clothing, they were given, it's similar to a prison color all throughout Germany, this white and bluish color, but they were marked as Jew. You might also be marked as something else, as a political radical against Hitler, but there's identification, and you're given one size fits all. There's no belts. So a guy like myself who's on the shorter side and the thinner side, I would be given an extra large and have to find a way to almost cinch up these uniforms, these prison uniforms, to make them fit. Shoes oftentimes were hastily constructed, and the bottom soles would wear out after a season. And there's even stories in Night, the book by Wiesel, where two people kill each other over shoes because they've had such bad frostbite from the previous winter that as it's going into the fall, two men really murder each other, Jews themselves, over shoes for the upcoming winter. So, and then it goes, the next and final phase is basically the eradication. So they're in the concentration camps. They're breaking down the human psyche. They're breaking down the actual physical bodies, and they start to move to firing squads. And the firing squads are a way to drastically kill people quick. Oftentimes would take them into a corner and shoot them. There's even some images where they'd make them dig ditches, go into the ditch, and then shoot down at them from point blank range. But bullets are expensive. So the Nazis found a way to economically make killing even more less costly to the German war machine. So they started to move to gassing. Chlorine gas was a way. They would simply pump it into a room like a shower facility. You were locked in the area. There's hardly any ventilation, and they could gas them that way. So if you didn't know if you were getting a shower to get all the filth off you, or if you were being gassed. There's a scene from Schindler's List you'll watch. And then the number of bodies, this is where we start to get to the gas, past the gas chambers. We're talking about where they burned the human bodies. They had to destroy the evidence in case there's ever, Germany didn't win the war, they wanted to try to reduce the likelihood of having war crimes, which they won't do, but they burn the bodies. So they're burning bodies at such a rampant pace that sometimes people from the neighboring towns, when the ash of human bodies descended down in the town, they didn't know in February or March if it was snow coming down or if it was human ash. So these are the pictures that always kind of shape me up a little bit, because you can just see the large scale volume that the Germans used to put human bodies into these areas and then get rid of them. One misperception throughout history, sometimes people think that the bodies are still alive when they throw them into these like burning chambers. They're dead at this point, and they simply put them into burn. And it takes a long time to, even right now, if you were cremated, it takes several hours to remove all the parts of the body and turn it into ash. So this is a nonstop process. And oftentimes they herded people down into the areas, exterminated them, and then used the survivors, the people who were in good health, the Jews, to transport the dead bodies to these actual burning facilities. This is the picture that always shakes me up a little bit, because you see the handle right there. And I always picture the person whose job it was to take the body lay it on this gurney, and then push the body into the furnace to dispose of it. I mean, it's the lowest form of humanity in these pictures here, the lowest of the low. And this is why we teach these things, so hopefully events like this never happen again. The saving grace, if you will, if you could call it that, as Germany implodes from both sides, you've got the Russians coming in from one side, you've got the Americans, the Brits, and the Canadians from the other. The Russians are the ones who find these death camps first. Most of these death camps are located in Poland or in Eastern Germany. So as the Russians get closer to Hitler first, they're the ones who find these death camps. American and British soldiers do find these camps as well. And one of the first primary sources we have are the medical journals of doctors who show up. And the soldiers naturally want to give these people who look starved, to the point of pure starvation. They want to give them water, they want to give them food. But there's some cases where the medical doctors had to pull the food away from these groups, because when the body is in a state of starvation, uh, if you eat too much food too fast, you can actually accelerate your heart rate. You can cause like actual mortality amongst the people. The stomach expands too much. There's too much pressure on the heart, and the body is too weak at this point. And that was tragically what happened in some of the early scenarios. So the doctors pulled food away from the survivors and slowly introduced it to them. The Nazi soldiers oftentimes were given a heads up to leave the night before. They oftentimes locked the prisoners in the concentration camp themselves and fled. The Nazis are basically on the run. These prison guard workers, some of them will be captured by the Americans, the Russians, the Brits. Some use their birth certificates. As a way, a fake birth certificate, a doctor birth certificate, and also a baptismal card. When you're baptized in the Catholic Church or the Christian Church, you're given a baptismal card. In Germany, they were given false ones as a way to identify themselves as a fake individual, and a lot of them are able to make their way out of Germany. And a lot of them actually found themselves in South America, in Argentina. They're given quartered by the governments there, but eventually a lot of them have been tracked down. So like I said, the starving prisoners wanted food, but they couldn't give them food. Oftentimes, it would lead to their deaths. They just slowly introduce food to the survivors. So here's my point of the lecture. Human beings, we're in a constant state of conflict. It's been since the dawn of time. Humans have fought over food and resources, and unfortunately, outsiders are oftentimes used as scapegoats politically for a person's agenda. It doesn't have to be that way. And this should be a good lesson, that when we start to exclude different people, different groups, to scapegoat them, we're going down that same slippery road that history has shown is not a good ending. So it even happens. I mean, it even happens amongst us. So if you're picking on a kid in the hallway, or if you're the online bully, when you are ostracizing a group or an individual and you're making them different, that's the start. That's the start of the problems. You're no better than evil. You're not. And a good line I saw this at the bottom was, terrible events happen when good people turn their backs on evil. When you let evil thrive, that is when terrible events happen. So it's a call for you to be on your best, to protect each other. We have one planet. We are one people. And events like this in history should teach us that lesson. And with that, that's the end of my lecture. I will post this online as well if you want a hard copy of this. You can rewatch this lecture anytime you want. I highly recommend that when you go over this lecture, look at the quiz from yesterday. When there are some quizzes, kind of do just a check yourself. I'll try to broadcast the answers in the next lecture to see if you got those questions right. Just check in for now. And in the meantime, I will see you tomorrow for your last lecture of the week. All right. Bye, you guys.